Pan Tadeusz by Adam Mickiewicz. Give a like if you enjoy this content. Chapter 8. The Foray Argument. The Seneschal's Astronomy, the Chamberlain's Remarks on Comets, mysterious scene in the judge's room, Thaddeus, wishing to extricate himself dexterously, gets into serious trouble, a new defoe, the last protest by an apparitor, the Count conquers Soplicowo, storm and massacre, Gerwazy as butler, the banquet after the foray. Before a thunderstorm there is a quiet, sullen moment, when the cloud that has gathered over men's heads stops, and with threatening countenance checks the breath of the winds. It is silent, but surveys the earth with the eyes of the lightnings, marking the spots where soon it will cast bolt after bolt. Such a moment of calm rested over the house at Soplicowo. You would have thought that a presentiment of unusual events had closed all lips, and had borne off the spirits of all into the land of dreams. After supper, the judge and his guests went out into the yard to enjoy the evening, and seated themselves on benches of turf built along the house wall. The whole company, in gloomy, quiet attitudes, gazed at the sky, which seemed to grow lower and narrower, and to approach the earth nearer and nearer, until both, hiding beneath a dark veil, like lovers, began a mysterious discourse, interpreting their feelings in the stifled sighs, whispers, murmurs, and half-uttered words, of which the marvelous music of the evening is composed. The owl began it, hooting from beneath the house roof. The bats rustled with flimsy wings and flew towards the house, where shone the panes of the windows and human faces. But nearer, the little sisters of the bats, the moths, hovered in a swarm, attracted by the white garments of the women. They were especially troublesome to Zozia, beating against her face and her bright eyes, which they mistook for two candles. In the air an immense cloud of insects gathered and whirled about, playing like the music of the spheres. Zozia's ear distinguished amid the thousand noises the accord of the flies and the false half-tone of the mosquitoes. In the fields, the evening concert had hardly begun. The musicians were just finishing the tuning of their instruments. Already the landrail, the first violin of the meadow, had shrieked thrice. Already from afar the bitterns seconded it with a bass boom below in the marshes. Already the woodcocks were rising up with whirling flight, uttering repeated cries, as though they were beating on drums. As a finale to the humming of the insects and the din of the birds, there resounded in a double chorus two ponds, like enchanted lakes in the Caucasus Mountains, silent through all the day and playing at evening. One pond, which had clear depths and a sandy shore, gave forth from its blue chest a gentle, solemn call. The other pond, with a muddy bottom and a turbid throat, answered it with a mournfully passionate cry. In both ponds sang countless hordes of frogs. The two choruses were attuned into two great accords. One thundered fortissimo, the other gently warbled. One seemed to complain, the other only sighed. Thus the two ponds conversed together across the fields, like two aeolian harps that play alternately. The darkness was thickening. Only in the woods and among the willows along the streamlet the eyes of wolves shone like candles, and farther off, on the narrowed borders of the horizon, here and there were the fires of shepherds' camps. Finally the moon lighted her silver torch, came forth from the wood, and illumined both sky and land. Now they both, half uncovered from the darkness, slept side by side like a happy married pair. The heaven took into its pure arms the breast of the earth, which shone silvery in the moonlight. Now opposite the moon, first one star and then another began to shine. Now 1,000 of them, and now 1,000,000 twinkled. Castor and his brother Pollux glittered at their head, once called among the Slavs Lele and Polel. Now they have been christened anew in the people's zodiac. One is called Lithuania, and the other the kingdom. Farther off glitter the two pans of the heavenly scales. Upon them God, on the day of creation, as old men say, weighed in turn the earth and all the planets before he set the burden of them in the abysses of the air. Then he hung up in heaven the gilded scales. On these men have modeled their balances and scale pans. To the north shines the circle of the starry sieve, through which God, as they say, gifted grains of corn, when he cast them down from heaven for Adam our father, who had been banished for his sins from paradise. Somewhat higher, David's car, ready for mounting, turns its long pole towards the North Star. The old Lithuanians know, concerning this chariot, that the populace err in calling it David's, since it is the angel's car. On it long ago rode Lucifer, when he summoned God to combat, rushing at full gallop along the Milky Way towards the threshold of heaven, until Michael threw him from his car and cast the car from the road. Now it is stretched out ruined amid the stars. The archangel Michael will not allow it to be repaired. And it is also well known among the old Lithuanians, but this knowledge they probably derived from the rabbins, that the huge, long dragon of the zodiac, which winds its starry coils over the sky, and which astronomers erroneously christen a serpent, is not a serpent but a fish, and is named Leviathan. Long ago it dwelt in the seas, but after the deluge it died for lack of water. Hence on the vault of heaven, both as a curiosity and as a reminder, the angels hung up its dead remains. In the same way the priest of Mir has hung up in his church the ribs and shanks of giants that have been dug from the earth. Such stories of the stars, which he had conned from books or learned from tradition, did the seneschal relate. Though in the evening the old seneschal's sight was weak, and he could see nothing in the sky through his spectacles, yet he knew by heart the name and form of every constellation. With his finger he indicated their places and their paths. Today they listened little to him, and gave no heed at all to the sieve, or to the dragon, or even to the scales. Today the eyes and thoughts of all were absorbed by a new guest, recently observed in the sky. This was a comet of the first magnitude and power, which had appeared in the west and was flying towards the north. With a bloody eye it looked askance upon the chariot, as though it wished to seize the empty place of Lucifer. Behind it threw out a long tail, and with it encircled a third part of the sky, gathered in hundreds of stars as with a net, and drew them after it. But it aimed its own head higher, towards the north, straight for the polar star. With inexpressible apprehension, all the Lithuanian folk gazed each night at this heavenly marvel, foreboding ill from it, and likewise from other signs. For too often they heard the cries of ill-omened birds, which, gathering in throngs on empty fields, sharpened their beaks as if awaiting corpses. Too often they noticed that the dogs rooted up the earth, and, as if scenting death, howled piercingly, which was an omen of famine or of war. But the forest guards beheld how through the graveyard walked the maid of pestilence, whose brow rises above the highest trees, and who waves in her left hand a bloody kerchief. From all this the overseer drew various conclusions, as he stood by the fence after coming to report on the work. So likewise did the bookkeeper, who was whispering with the steward. But the chamberlain was seated on the bench of turf before the house. He interrupted the conversation of the guests, a sign that he was preparing to speak. In the moonlight shone his great snuff-box, all of pure gold, set with diamonds. In the middle of it was a portrait of King Stanislaw, under glass. He tapped on it with his fingers, took a pinch, and said, "Thaddeus, your talk about the stars is only an echo of what you have heard in school. As to marvels, I prefer to take the advice of simple people. I too studied astronomy for 2 years at Wilno, where Pani Puzinen, a wise and a rich woman, had given the income of a village of 200 peasants for the purchase of various glasses and telescopes. Father Pochobut, a famous man, was in charge of the observatory, and at that time rector of the whole university. However, he finally abandoned his professor's chair and his telescope and returned to his monastery, to his quiet cell, and there he died as a good Christian should. I am also acquainted with Sniadecki, who is a very wise man, though a layman. Now the astronomers regard planets and comets just as plain citizens do a coach. They know whether it is drawing up before the king's palace, or whether it is starting abroad from the city gates. But who was riding in it, and why, of what he talked with the king, and whether the king dismissed the ambassador with peace or war, of all that they do not even inquire. I remember in my time when Bernicki started in his coach to Jassy, and after that dishonorable coach streamed a train of Targowica Confederates, as the tale follows that comet. The plain people, though they did not meddle in public deliberations, guessed at once that that train was an omen of treason. The report is that the folk has given the name of Broom to this comet, and says that it will sweep away 1,000,000 men. And in reply, the seneschal said with a bow, "That is true, Your Excellency the Chamberlain. I remember myself what was once told me when I was a little child. I remember, though I was not 10 years old at the time, how I saw at our house the late Sapieha, lieutenant of a regiment of cuirassiers, who later was court-martial of the kingdom, and finally died as Grand Chancellor of Lithuania at the age of 110 years. When Jan III Sobieski was king, he had served in the Vienna campaign under the command of the Hetman Jablanovsky. So this chancellor related that just at the moment when King Jan III was mounting his horse, when the papal nuncio had blessed him for the journey, and the Austrian ambassador was kissing his foot as he handed him the stirrup, the ambassador was named Count Wilczek, the king cried, "See what is going on in heaven!" They beheld that over their heads was advancing a comet by the same path that the armies of Mahomet had taken, from the east to the west. Later, Father Bartokowski, who composed a panegyric for the triumph at Krakow, under the title Orientis Fulmen, discoursed much about that comet. I have also read of it in a work called Janina, in which the entire expedition of the late King John is described, and where there is engraved the great standard of Mahomet, and just such a comet as we see today. "Amen," said the judge in reply. "I accept your augury that a Jan III may appear along with the star. Today there is a great hero in the west. Perhaps the comet will bring him to us, which may God grant." Sorrowfully drooping his head, the seneschal replied, "A comet sometimes forebodes wars and sometimes mere brawls. It is not good that it has appeared here over Soplica. Perhaps it threatens us with some household misfortune. Yesterday we had wrangling and disputes enough, both at the time of the hunt and during the banquet. In the morning the notary quarreled with the assessor, and Thaddeus challenged the count in the evening. The disagreement seems to have arisen from the bear's hide, and if my friend the judge had not hindered me, I should have reconciled the two adversaries right at the table. For I should have liked to tell a curious incident, similar to what occurred at our hunt yesterday, which happened to the foremost sportsmen of my time, the deputy Rejtan and the Prince de Nassau. The occurrence was as follows. Prince Czartoryski, the general of Podol, was traveling from Volhynia to his Polish estates, or, if I remember correctly, to the Diet at Warsaw. On his way he visited the gentry, partly for amusement and partly to win popularity, so he called upon Pan Thaddeus Rejtan, today of holy memory, who was later our deputy from Nowogrodek, and in whose house I grew up from childhood. So Rejtan, on the occasion of the prince's coming, had invited guests, and the gentry had gathered in large numbers. There were theatrical entertainments. The prince was devoted to the theater. Kashitz, who lives in Jatra, gave fireworks. Pan Tyzenhaus sent dancers, and Oginsky and Pan Sultan, who lives in Zgentiol, furnished musicians. In a word, at home they offered entertainments gorgeous beyond expectation, and in the forest they arranged a mighty hunt. It is well known to you, gentlemen, that almost all the Czartoryskis within the memory of man, though they spring from the blood of the Jagielos, are nevertheless not over keen on hunting, though certainly not from laziness, but from their foreign tastes. And the Prince General looked oftener into books than into kennels, and oftener into ladies' alcoves than into the forests. In the prince's suite was a German, Prince de Nassau, of whom they related that, when a guest in the Libyan country, he had once gone hunting with the Moorish kings, and there with a spear had overcome a tiger in hand-to-hand combat, of which feat that Prince de Nassau boasted greatly. In our country at that time they were hunting wild boars. Rejtan had killed with his musket an immense sow, at great risk to himself, for he shot from close by. Each of us admired and praised the sureness of the aim. Only the German, de Nassau, listened with indifference to such compliments, and walking off, muttered in his beard that a sure aim proved only a bold eye, but that cold steel proved a bold hand. And once more he began to talk big about his Libya and his spear, his Moorish kings and his tiger. This began to be annoying to Pan Rejtan, who, being a quick-tempered man, smote his sword and said, "My lord prince, whoever looks boldly, fights boldly. Wild boars are equal to tigers, and sabers to spears." Then the German and he began somewhat too lively a discussion. Luckily the Prince General interrupted their dispute and reconciled them, speaking in French. What he said to them I know not, but that reconciliation was only ashes over live coals, for Rejtan took the matter to heart, bided his time, and promised to play the German a good trick. This trick he almost atoned for with his own life, but but he played it the next day, as I will tell you immediately." Here the seneschal paused, and raising his right hand asked the chamberlain for his snuff-box. He took several pinches, but did not vouchsafe to finish his tale, as though he wished to sharpen the curiosity of his hearers. At last he was beginning, when that tale, so curious and so diligently hearkened to, was again interrupted. For someone had unexpectedly sent a man to the judge, with the message that he was waiting on business that brooked no delay. The judge, wishing them good night, bade farewell to the company. Immediately they scattered in various directions. Some went into the house to sleep, others into the barn, to rest on the hay. The judge went to give audience to the traveler. The others were already asleep. Thaddeus wandered about the hallway, pacing like a watchman near his uncle's door, for he had to seek his counsel about important affairs, on that very day, before he went to sleep. He did not dare to knock, for the judge had locked the door and was talking secretly with somebody. Thaddeus awaited the end of the interview and pricked up his ears. From within he heard a sobbing. Without touching the latch, he cautiously looked through the keyhole. He saw a marvelous thing. The judge and Roback were kneeling on the floor in each other's embrace, and were weeping hot tears. Roback was kissing the judge's hands, while the judge, weeping, embraced Roback around the neck. Finally, after a pause of a quarter of an hour in their talk, Roback softly spoke these words. "Brother, God knows that till now I have never betrayed the secrets that, in repentance for my sins, I vowed at my confession to keep inviolate, that, entirely devoted to God and to my country, not serving pride nor seeking earthly glory, I have lived till now and wished to die a Bernardine monk, concealing my name not only from the crowd, but from you and from my own son. However, the provincial has given me permission to make the disclosure in articulo mortis. Who knows whether I shall return alive? Who knows what will happen in Dobrzin? Brother, affairs are frightfully confused. The French are still far away. We must wait till the winter is over, but the gentry may not restrain themselves. Perhaps I have been too active in stirring up the insurrection. They may have understood me ill. The warden has spoiled all. That crazy count, I hear, has rushed away to Dobrzin. I could not head him off, for an important reason. Old Maciek has recognized me, and if he betrays me, I must needs bow my neck beneath the penknife. Nothing will restrain the warden. My life matters little, but by that disclosure I should destroy the foundations of the plot. And yet, I must be there today and see what is going on, though I perish. Without me the gentry will run wild. Farewell, my dearest brother. Farewell, I must hasten. If I perish, you alone will sigh for my soul. In case of war, the whole secret is known to you. Finish what I have begun, and remember that you are a Soplica." Here the monk wiped away his tears, buttoned his gown, drew on his cowl, and quietly opened the shutters of the rear window. Evidently he jumped through the window into the garden. The judge, left alone, sat down in a chair and began to weep. Thaddeus waited a moment before he jingled at the latch. When the door was opened, he went in quietly and bowed low. "My dear uncle," he said, "I have spent here but a few days, and the days have passed like a flash. I have not yet had time to enjoy fully your house and your own company, but I must depart. I must hasten away at once. Today, uncle, or tomorrow at the latest. You remember that we have challenged the Count. To fight him is my affair, and I have sent a challenge. Since dueling is prohibited in Lithuania, I am going to the borders of the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. The Count, of course, is a braggart, but he does not lack courage, and will appear without fail at the appointed place. We will settle accounts, and if God grants me his blessing, I will punish him, and then will swim over the Lososna, where the ranks of my brothers await me. I have heard that my father in his will bade me enter the army, and I have not heard that that will has been cancelled." "My dear Thaddeus," said his uncle, "have you been scalded with boiling water, or are you dodging like a hunted fox that waves its brush in one direction and itself runs in another? We have challenged him, to be sure, and you will have to fight, but why are you so bent on going today? Before a duel it is the custom to send friends and settle the terms. The Count may still beg our pardon and make amends. Just wait, there is still time enough. Some other whimsy must be driving you away from here. Speak it out frankly. Why such excuses? I am your uncle, and, though old, I know what young hearts are. I have been a father to you." As he spoke, he stroked his nephew beneath the chin. "My little finger has already been whispering in my ear that you, sir, have been carrying on some intrigues here with the ladies. Nowadays young men take to the ladies devilish quick. But my dear Thaddeus, confess it to me, and frankly." "That is the truth," mumbled Thaddeus. "There are other causes, my beloved uncle. Perhaps it was my own fault, a mistake. No, a misfortune. It is now hard to correct it. No, dear uncle, I can stay here no longer. An error of youth. Uncle, do not question me further. I must depart from Soplica as quickly as may be." "Oho," said his uncle, "this is certainly some love tiff. I noticed yesterday that you bit your lips while you looked from under your eyebrows at a certain little girl. I saw that she too had a sour expression. I know all that nonsense. When a pair of children fall in love, then they have no end of misfortunes. Now they feel happy, now again they are afflicted and cast down. Now again, for God knows what reason, they are ready to bite each other. Now they stand in corners as if playing blind man's buff, and won't say a word to each other. Sometimes they even run out into the fields. If such an attack is upon you, just be patient. There is a cure for all that. I will undertake to reconcile you shortly. I know all that nonsense. I have been young myself. Tell me all about it. In return, I too may reveal something, and thus we will confess ourselves to each other." "Uncle," said Thaddeus, kissing his hand and blushing, "I will tell you the truth. I have taken a great liking to that little girl, Zosia, your ward, though I have seen her only a couple of times. But they tell me that you design for my wife the chamberlain's daughter, a beautiful girl and a rich man's daughter. Now I could not marry Panna Rosa when I am in love with Zosia. It is hard to change one's heart, but dishonorable to marry when one loves another. Perhaps time will heal me. I shall depart for a long absence." "Thaddeus," interrupted his uncle, "that is a strange way of being in love, to run away from one's beloved. It is well that you are frank. You see, you would have committed an act of folly by going away. But what should you say if I helped you to obtain Zosia? Hey, well, aren't you jumping for joy?" "Your goodness amazes me," said Thaddeus after a pause. "But yet the favor of my kind uncle will avail me nothing. Ah, my hopes are vain, for Pani Telemina will not yield me Zosia." "We will ask her," said the judge. "No one can prevail upon her," interrupted Thaddeus hastily. "No, I cannot wait, uncle. I must be on my way quickly tomorrow. Only give me your blessing, uncle. I have made all my preparations and am now leaving for the Grand Duchy." The judge, twirling his mustaches, gazed angrily at the lad. "Are you so frank? Have you opened your heart to me so fully? First that duel, then again love and this departure. Oh, there is something behind all this. They have been telling me, I have watched your steps. You are a deceitful, giddy fellow. You have been telling lies. Where were you going that evening, and what were you tracking like a setter outside the house? See here, Thaddeus, maybe you have seduced Zosia and are now running away? If so, booby, you will not succeed. Whether you like it or not, I tell you that you shall marry Zosia. Otherwise, the horsewhip, tomorrow you shall stand before the altar. And you talk to me of feelings, of an unchanging heart. You are a liar! Foe! I'll look into your case, Pan Thaddeus. I'll make your ears smart for you. I've had enough trouble today, till my head aches with it, and now you come to keep me from going to sleep in peace. Now go to bed." So speaking, he threw open the door and called the apparitor to undress him. Thaddeus went out quietly, hanging his head, and thought over his bitter interview with his uncle. It was the first time that he had ever been scolded so severely. He appreciated the justice of the reproaches and blushed at himself. What should he do? What if Zosia should learn the whole story? Should he ask for her hand? But what would Telemena say? No, he felt that he could remain no longer in Soplica. Thus buried in thought, he had hardly made 2 steps when something crossed his path. He looked and saw a phantom all in white, tall, frail, and slender. It approached him with an outstretched arm, from which was reflected the trembling light of the moon, and stepping up to him, softly moaned, "Ungrateful man, you sought my glance, and now you avoid it. You sought for speech with me, and today you close your ears, as though in my words and in my glance there were poison. I deserve my fate. I knew who you were, a man. Guiltless of coquetry, I did not wish to torture you, but made you happy, and is this the gratitude you show me? A triumph over my soft heart has hardened your heart. Since you won it so easily, too quickly have you despised it. I deserve my fate, but taught by bitter experience, believe me, that I despise myself more than you can despise me. Telemina, said Thaddeus, I vow to heaven that my heart is not hard, nor do I avoid you through contempt. But just consider, they are watching us, following us. Can we act so openly? What will people say? Why, this is improper, I vow, it is a sin. A sin, she answered him with a bitter smile. O you young innocent, you lamb, if I, who am a woman, from very force of love, care not though I be discovered, and though I be put to shame, but you a man, what matters it to one of you men, even though he may confess that he has intrigues with a dozen sweethearts at a time? Speak the truth, you wish to desert me. She dissolved in tears. Telemena, answered Thaddeus, what would the world say of a man who now, at my time of life, in good health, should settle down in a village and pass his time making love, when so many young men, so many married men are leaving their wives and children and fleeing abroad to the standards of their country? Although I might wish to remain, does it depend on me? My father in his will bade me enter the Polish army, and now my uncle has repeated that command. Tomorrow I depart. I have already made my resolution, and with heaven's aid, Telemena, I shall not change it. I do not wish to bar your path to glory, said Telemena, or to hinder your happiness. You are a man, you will find a sweetheart worthier of your love, you will find one richer and fairer. Only for my consolation, let me know before we part that your liking for me was a true affection, that it was not merely a jest or wanton lust, but love. Let me know that my Thaddeus loves me. Let me hear once more from your lips the words I love. Let me grave them in my heart, and write them in my thoughts. I shall forgive more easily, though you cease to love me, remembering how you have loved me. And she began to sob. Thaddeus, seeing that she wept and implored him so feelingly, and that she required of him only such a trifle, was moved. Sincere sorrow and pity overcame him, and if he had searched the secrets of his heart, perhaps at that moment he himself could not have told whether he loved her or not. So he spoke eagerly. Telemena, so may God's bright lightning strike me, if it be not true that I have been fond of you. Yes, that I have loved you deeply. Short were the moments that we spent together, but so sweetly and so tenderly did they pass that for long, forever, will they be present to my thoughts, and heaven knows that I shall never forget you. With a bound Telemena fell upon his neck. This is what I have hoped for. You love me, so I still live. For today I was going to end my life by my own hand. Since you love me, my dear one, can you abandon me? To you I have given my heart, and to you I will give my worldly goods. I will follow you everywhere. With you each corner of the world will be charming. Of the wildest wilderness love, believe me, will make a paradise. Thaddeus tore himself from her embrace by force. What? Said he. Are you mad? Follow me? Where? How? Shall I, being a common soldier, drag you after me as a sutleress? Then we will be espoused, said Telemena. No, never, shouted Thaddeus. At present I have no intention whatever of marrying, nor of making love. Nonsense. Let's drop the matter. I beg you, my dear, bethink yourself. Be calm, I am grateful to you, but it is impossible for us to marry. Let us love each other, but just in different places. I cannot remain longer. No, I must go. Farewell, my Telemena, I leave tomorrow. He spoke, pulled his hat over his eyes, and turned aside, meaning to depart. But Telemena checked him with an eye and countenance like those of Medusa's head. Against his will he had to remain. He looked with terror on her form. She had become pale, without motion, breath, or life. At last, stretching out an arm like a sword to transfix him, with her finger aimed straight at the eyes of Thaddeus, she cried, "This is what I wished! Ha, tongue of dragon, heart of viper! I care not that, infatuated with you, I scorned the assessor, the count, and the notary, that you seduced me, and have now abandoned me in my orphanhood. For that I care not. You are a man, I know your falsity. I know that, like others, you too would be capable of breaking your plighted troth. But I did not know that so basely you could lie. I have been listening by your uncle's door. So what about that child Zosia? Has she attracted your regard? And do you traitorously lay claim to her? Hardly had you deceived one unfortunate, when already beneath her very eyes you were seeking new victims. Flee, but my curses will reach you, or remain, and I will publish your perfidies to the world. Your arts will no longer corrupt others as they have corrupted me. Away! I despise you. You are a liar, a base man." At this insult, mortal for a gentleman's ears, the like of which no Soplica had ever heard, Thaddeus trembled, and his face grew pale as that of a corpse. Stamping his foot and biting his lips, he muttered, "Idiotic woman." He walked away, but the epithet base echoed in his heart. The young man shuddered and felt that he had deserved it. He felt that he had inflicted a great wrong on Telemina. His conscience told him that she had reproached him justly. Yet he felt that after those reproaches he loathed her more violently than ever. Of Zosia, alas, he did not venture to think. He was ashamed. However, that very Zosia, so lovely and so charming, his uncle had been seeking to win for him. Perhaps she would have been his wife, had not a demon, after entangling him in sin after sin, lie after lie, at last bade him adieu with a mocking laugh. He was rebuked and scorned by all. In a few short days he had ruined his future. He felt the just punishment of his crime. In this storm of feelings, like an anchor of rest, there suddenly flashed upon him the thought of the duel. "I must slay the Count, the scoundrel," he cried. "I must perish or be avenged." But for what? That he did not know himself. And that great burst of anger, as it had come over him in the twinkling of an eye, so it vanished away, he was seized anew by a deep sadness. He meditated whether his observation might not be true, that the Count and Zosia had some mutual understanding. And what of that? Perhaps the Count sincerely loves Zosia, perhaps she loves him, and will choose him for her husband. By what right could I desire to break off that marriage, and, unhappy myself, to destroy the happiness of every one? He fell into despair and saw no other means except speedy flight. Whither? To the grave. So, pressing his fist against his bent brow, he ran to the meadows, where below the ponds glittered, and took his stand above the one with marshy banks. In its greenish depths he buried his greedy gaze and drew into his breast with joy the swampy odors, and opened his lips to them. For suicide, like all wild passions, springs from the imagination. In the giddy whirling of his brain he felt an unspeakable longing to drown himself in the swamp. But Telemena, guessing the young man's despair from his wild gestures, and seeing that he had run towards the ponds, although she burned with such just wrath against him, was nevertheless alarmed. In reality she had a kind heart. She had felt sorrow that Thaddeus dared to love another. She had wished to punish him, but she had not thought of destroying him. So she rushed after him, raising both her arms and crying, "Stop! What folly! Love me or not! Get married or depart! Only stop!" But in his swift course he had far outstripped her. He already was standing at the shore. By a strange decree of fate, along that same shore was riding the Count, at the head of his band of jockeys, and carried away by the charm of so fair a night, and by the marvelous harmony of that subaqueous orchestra, of those choruses that rang like Aeolian harps, for no frogs sing so beautifully as those of Poland, he checked his horse and forgot about his expedition. He turned his ear to the pond and listened curiously. He ran his eyes over the fields, over the expanse of the heavens. He was evidently composing in his thoughts a nocturnal landscape. In very truth, the neighborhood was picturesque. The two ponds inclined their faces towards each other, like a pair of lovers. The right pond had waters smooth and pure as a maiden's cheeks. The left was somewhat darker, like the swarthy face of a youth already shaded with manly down. The right was encircled with glittering golden sand as if with bright hair, but the brow of the left bristled with osiers, and was tufted with willows. Both ponds were clothed in a garment of green. From them there flowed and met two streams, like hands clasped together. Farther on the stream formed a waterfall. It fell but did not perish, for into the darkness of the ravine it bore upon its waves the golden shimmer of the moon. The water fell in sheets, and on every sheet glittered skeins of moonbeams. The light in the ravine was dispersed into fine splinters, which the fleeing flood seized and carried off below, but from on high the moonbeams fell in fresh skeins. You might have thought that by the pond a nixie was sitting, and with one hand was pouring forth a fountain from a bottomless urn, while with the other she cast sportively into the water handfuls of enchanted gold that she took from her apron. Farther on, the brook, running out from the ravine, wound over the plain and became quiet, but one could see that it still flowed, for along its moving, shimmering surface the quivering moonlight twinkled. As the fair serpent of Zmuds called Giwoitos, though, lying amid the heather, it seems to slumber, still crawls along, for by turns it shows silver and golden, until it suddenly vanishes from the eye in the moss or ferns. So the brook wound and hid among the alders, which showed black on the far horizon, raising their light forms, indistinct to the eye, like spirits half seen and half in mist. Between the ponds in the ravine a mill was hidden. As an old guardian who is spying on two lovers and has heard their talk together, grows angry, storms, shakes his head and hands and stutters out threats against them, so that mill suddenly shook its brow overgrown with moss and twirled around its many-fingered fist. Hardly had it begun to clatter and stir its sharp-toothed jaws, when at the same moment it deafened the love-talk of the ponds and awoke the Count. The Count, seeing that Thaddeus had approached so near the spot where he had halted under arms, shouted, "To arms! Seize him!" The jockeys rushed forward, and, before Thaddeus could comprehend what was happening to him, they had already caught him. They ran towards the mansion and poured into the yard. The mansion awoke, the dogs barked, the watchman shouted, the judge rushed out half-clad. He saw the armed throng and thought that they were robbers until he recognized the Count. "What does this mean?" he asked. The Count flashed his sword over him, but when he saw that he was unarmed, his fury grew cool. "Soplica," he said, "ancestral enemy of my family, today I punish thee for ancient and for fresh offenses. Today thou wilt render me an account for the seizure of my fortune before I avenge me for the insult to my honor." But the judge crossed himself and cried, "In the name of the Father and of the Son, foh, my lord the Count, are you a robber? By God, does this befit your birth, your education, and the station you occupy in the world? I will not permit myself to be wronged." Meanwhile, the servants of the judge had run up, some with clubs, others with guns. The seneschal, standing some distance away, looked curiously into the eyes of the Count, and held a knife in his sleeve. They were already on the point of beginning battle, but the judge prevented them. It was vain to offer any defense, for a new enemy was coming up. Among the alders they saw a flash, and heard the report of a carbine. The bridge over the river rattled with the trampling of cavalry, and 1,000 voices thundered, "Down with the Soplica!" The judge shuddered, for he recognized Gerwasi's watchword. "This is nothing," cried the Count. "There will soon be more of us here. Submit, judge, these are my allies." Thereupon the assessor ran up shouting, "I arrest you in the name of his imperial majesty. Yield your sword, Count, for I shall summon the aid of the army, and you are aware that if anyone dares to make a night attack under arms, it is provided by Ukaz 1,200, that is a mailf." Thereupon the Count struck him across the face with the flat of his sword. The assessor fell stunned and disappeared among the nettles. All thought that he was wounded or dead. "I see," said the judge, "that this looks like brigandage." Everyone shrieked. All were deafened by the wailing of Zosia, who, throwing her arms around the judge, cried like a child pricked with needles by Jews. Meanwhile Telemena had rushed among the horses and extended her clasped hands towards the Count. "Upon your honor," she cried with a piercing voice, with head thrown back and with streaming hair. "By all that is holy, we implore you on our knees. Count, will you dare to refuse? Ladies beg you. Savage man, you must first murder us." She fell in a faint. The Count sprang to her aid, amazed and somewhat disconcerted by this scene. "Pana Sophia," he said, "Pani Telemena, never shall this sword be stained with the blood of an unarmed foe. Soplicas, you are my prisoners. Thus did I in Italy, when beneath the crag that the Sicilians call Birbante Rock I overcame a camp of brigands. The armed I slew, those that laid down their weapons I captured and had bound. They walked behind the steeds and adorned my glorious triumph. Then they were hanged at the foot of Etna." It was an especial piece of good luck for the Soplicas that the Count, having better horses than the gentry, and wishing to be the first in the engagement, had left them behind, and had galloped at least a mile in advance of the rest of the cavalry, along with his jockeys, who were obedient and well disciplined, and formed a sort of regular army. For the rest of the gentry, as is usually the case with insurgents, were turbulent, and beyond measure quick at hanging. As it was, the Count had time to recover from his heat and wrath, and to deliberate how to end the battle without bloodshed, so he gave orders to lock the Soplica family in the mansion as prisoners of war, and stationed guards at the doors. Then with a shout of, "Down with the Soplicas!" the gentry rushed on in a body, surrounded the estate, and took it by storm, so much the more easily since the leader had been captured and the garrison had run away. But the conquerors wanted to fight and looked for an enemy. Not being admitted to the mansion, they ran to the farmhouse, to the kitchen. When they entered the kitchen, the sight of the pots, the hardly extinct fire, the fresh smell of cooked food, the crunching of the dogs which were gnawing the remains of the supper, appealed to the hearts of all, and changed the current of their thoughts. It cooled their wrath, but inflamed their desire for food. Wearied by the march and by an entire day of debate, they thrice shouted with one voice, "Eat, eat!" to which there came a reply of, "Drink, drink!" from among the throng of gentry. There arose two choruses, some crying, "Drink!" and others, "Eat!" The watchwords flew and echoed, and wherever they reached they made mouths water and stomachs feel empty. And so, at a signal given from the kitchen, the army unexpectedly dispersed for foraging. Gerwazy, repulsed from the judge's rooms, had to retire out of regard for the count's watchmen. So, not being able to take vengeance on his enemy, he bethought himself of the second great aim of this expedition. As a man experienced and adept in legal matters, he wished to establish the count in his new possessions legally and formally. So he ran for the apparitor, and at last, after long search, discovered him behind the stove. Straightway he seized him by the collar, dragged him to the yard, and, pointing his penknife at his breast, spoke thus: "Mr. Apparitor, my lord the Count ventures to ask your honor that you would be so kind as immediately to proclaim before the gentlemen and brethren the establishment of the Count in the castle, in the estate of the Soplicas, the village, the sown fields, the fallow land, in a word, cum grovibus, forestis et borderibus, peasantibus bailiffus, et omnibus rebus et quibusdam allis. You know the formula, so bark it out, don't leave out anything." "Mr. Warden, wait a while," said Protesy boldly, thrusting his hands into his belt. "I am ready to carry out all the orders of the contending parties, but I warn you that the act will not be valid, being extorted by violence and proclaimed by night." "What violence?" said the warden. "There is no assault here. Why, I am asking you politely. If it is too dark for you, then I will kindle a fire with my penknife so that it will be as bright in your peepers as in 7 churches. "My dear Gerwazy," said the apparitor, "why be so huffy? I am an apparitor. It is not my business to discuss the case. Everybody knows that a party to a suit summons an apparitor and dictates to him whatever he chooses, and the apparitor proclaims it. The apparitor is the ambassador of the law, and ambassadors are not subject to punishment, so that I do not know why you keep me under guard. I will immediately write an act if someone will only bring me a lantern, but meanwhile I proclaim, brothers, come to order." And in order to make his voice carry better, he stepped up on a great heap of beams, near the garden fence beams were drying. He climbed on them, and at once, as if the wind had blown him away, he vanished from sight. They heard how he plumped into the cabbage patch. They saw how his white hat flitted like a dove over the dark hemp. Bucket shot at the hat, but missed his aim. Then there was a crackling of poles. Protesy was already in the hop patch. "I protest," he shouted. He was sure of escape, for behind him he had swamps and the bed of the stream. After this protest, which resounded like the last cannon shot on conquered ramparts, all resistance subsided in the mansion of the Soplicas. The hungry gentry pillaged and seized upon whatever they could find. Sprinkler, taking his stand in the cowshed, sprinkled an ox and 2 calves on the brows, and Razor plunged his saber in their throats. All with equal diligence employed his sword, sticking hogs and sucking pigs beneath the shoulder blades. And now slaughter threatened the poultry. A watchful flock of those geese that once saved Rome from the treachery of the Gauls in vain cackled for aid. In place of Manlius, Bucket attacked the coop, strangled some of the birds, and tied others alive to the girdle of his contuche. In vain the geese called out hoarsely, winding their necks about. In vain the ganders hissed and nipped their assailant. He ran, besprinkled with the glittering down, borne forward as if on wheels by the motion of the close-packed wings. He seemed to be Chalklick, the winged evil spirit. But the most terrible slaughter, though the least uproar, was among the hens. Young Buzzard assaulted the hen coop, and catching them with a cord, he pulled down from the roosts the cocks and the rough-feathered and crested hens. One after another he strangled them and laid them in a heap, lovely birds fed upon pearl barley. Heedless buzzard, what fervor carried thee away? Never after this wilt thou win thy pardon from the angry Zosia. Gerwazi called to mind the days of old, and bade them give him the belts from their contusions, and with them he drew from the Soplicas cellar casks of old brandy, mead, and beer. Some they broached at once, others the gentry, thick as ants, seized with a will and rolled to the castle. There the whole throng gathered for the night encampment. There were established the count's headquarters. They laid 100 fires, boiled, broiled, and roasted. The tables bent beneath the meat, and drink flowed in a river. The gentry were minded to eat, drink, and sing the whole night through, but slowly they began to doze and yawn. Eye after eye was extinguished, and the whole company nodded their heads. Each fell where he sat, one with a platter, one over a tankard, one by a quarter of beef. Thus the victors were conquered at last by sleep, the brother of death.
Remember to subscribe.